So Donald Trump is the first president to be wiretapped and spied on. He's the first president to be impeached twice and acquitted twice. He's the first president to be banned and censored on social media. He's the first president to have his home raided by the FBI. He's the first president to be indicted not once, but 4 times. And he's the first citizen and former president to have a judge with no jury unilaterally decide and impose a $350 million fine in a civil case where not a single law was broken, there were 0 victims, and all loans were paid back on time. I don't know about you, but I'm supporting the guy with the most impeachments, indictments, lawsuits, and unconstitutional fines because that's the guy they clearly fear the most. I mean, at this point, unless you live under a rock, whether you love him or whether you hate him, you have to see that this is all politically motivated. For 7 years, it's all been part of a plan to target him, make him bow, take his swag away, humble him, and to break him and his supporters down.
And guys, before we get started, I just want to thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you for hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Let's get started. That's the story, folks. It's Trump versus the machine at this point. And it's obvious with the ABC News debate. They're not even trying to hide it from us. Linsey Davis, one of the moderators, is a sorority sister of Kamala Harris. Now, you would think that given this conflict of interest that she would say no to the debate, but that didn't happen. In fact, she doubled down and she went to work for Harris. We know that Trump got fact-checked multiple times by both her and David Muir. With that, both journalists have undergone scrutiny from their peers as they found this to be extremely biased. The backlash has led Linsey Davis defending their actions, although she might have actually made it worse. So according to her, the decision to fact-check Donald Trump was because Biden did so poorly in their debate that he had to back out of the presidential race. In her words, she said the people were concerned that statements were allowed to just kind of hang and not be disputed by the candidate Biden at the time or the moderators. Can you believe that? So basically, she took it upon herself to defend Kamala Harris in real time because she didn't want her to end up like Biden. Now, I'm not really sure how that works out because she's not running for president, but she sure did get $1 million paycheck from Kamala Harris to be the moderator. I wonder if that might have influenced her decision. Kamala Harris is the one who wants to be president, not Linsey Davis. It is not her job as a moderator to call out alleged lies, if any are being told. That's up to the candidate who's actually in the debate. That's the whole point of the debate. Because if they were going to do this, they should have just stood up there with Kamala Harris and acted as her support team. Like literally, if they're going to behave this way, they should have stood next to Kamala Harris at the podium. Either that or just try and run for president so that you can actually be involved actively in the next debate. A debate that we all know has been rigged. An ABC whistleblower has let the cat out of the bag here, folks. Their name has been redacted for safety purposes, but we're going to go over what they said in this affidavit. So the whistleblower said that they've worked with ABC News for well over a decade, holding multiple positions throughout the years. They say that over the years, the news outlet has changed its reporting from unbiased to a model influenced by external factors. They also say that they're not endorsing Donald Trump as president. Interesting. So here we have a person who doesn't even support Donald Trump, but is still letting the cat out of the bag regarding ABC being biased toward left-leaning Democrats and Kamala Harris. But they did, however, confirm a few things about the debate. One is that the Harris campaign imposed restrictions on ABC on what they can ask her. She couldn't be asked about the health of Joe Biden, which you would think that they would ask, her tenure as Attorney General in San Francisco, nor could they ask about Tony West. So West is Harris's brother-in-law who's facing allegations of embezzling billions of dollars in taxpayer funds, a person who may also be involved in Kamala Harris's administration if she wins. Now again, these are allegations that are being made by a whistleblower. They're doing this even with the possibility of perjury. It's also reported that the internal organization climate in ABC News is not good for any Trump supporters. And for their safety, the whistleblower claims to have recorded several conversations that will in fact prove that the Harris campaign insisted on not only fact-checking Trump. They said that if any of the questions were not to their liking, Harris would then back out of the debate. Now, we know that ABC News adhered to her demands because she showed up. Now, it's also being said here that her team received sample questions. They weren't the exact questions, but they covered very similar topics to what would appear in the debate.
Were you surprised how the moderators heavily weighted the debate?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I think it was what we should all have expected. We see how these people operate. You know, you look at the comments that Muir has made, you look at the comments that Linsey Davis has made, their bias was baked in from the very beginning because they're not real journalists.
Yeah.
They are essentially these political operatives whose job it is to try to distract away from Kamala Harris's record, distract away from the serious issues that we face. Not a single question was raised about how are you going to prevent the destruction of our country and the world from nuclear war, which we are closer to than ever before. And on the eve of the Islamist terrorist attack on 9/11, they did not raise a point, a question, or a challenge about how either of these candidates will stem the spread of this radical Islamist ideology around the world and in our own country here at home, and how you would prevent this threat from continuing to grow. So, you know, they were not at all interested in informing the American people about the truth about anything. We can expect that they will continue to be propagandists for Kamala Harris.
Now, Speaker Mike Johnson will be the guy who can confirm all of this, so we're going to have to wait for an official statement once it's released. But do any of you guys find this information to be plausible? And I just want to remind you guys that Kamala Harris was sharp as a tack during this debate, was she not? It was like she knew what was coming. But have you seen her try to answer a question in real time?
What do you understand his appeal to be? And how do you speak to his voters? Or maybe people who just share his values but are open to something else?
I, based on experience and a lived experience, no. In my heart, I know, in my soul, I know that the vast majority of us as Americans have so much more in common than what separates us. And I also believe that I am accurate in knowing that most Americans want a leader who brings us together as Americans, and not someone who professes to be a leader who is trying to have us point our fingers at each other. I think people are exhausted with that approach, to be honest with you. I think people want a leader who has common sense and tries to find common ground. I'm supported by over 200 Republicans who worked for both Presidents Bush, John McCain, and Mitt Romney. I'm supported by the former Vice President Dick Cheney, former Congress member Liz Cheney. And I think people are more willing now, in light of the hate and division that we see coming out of Donald Trump, to say, hey, let's put country first. And I think that just makes us stronger and more healthy as a country. To say, look, we can all debate our differences around, you know, various policies, but let's stop with the division. Like, enough of that. Let's bring everybody together.
This can't be the same Kamala Harris that was in the debate. She used to be so quick and witty. You have to wonder what happened between the debate and this interview, because she is, again, dependent on canned answers that she's prepared beforehand. And it might not even be her who prepared them. She's got most of it probably memorized at this point. I mean, we keep hearing the same stories being repeated over and over and over from her. It's this force of habit that will ultimately expose Kamala Harris as an actress and not a presidential candidate. But even with all that being said, she still didn't manage to take Donald Trump down in the polls. So according to Polymarket's election forecast, they're tied. And that's not good for Harris, because Trump was down in the polls against Hillary Clinton and he still managed to win. But what's worse is that the former president holds a 20-point lead over Harris in the Electoral College odds, according to Nate Silver. And no, Silver is not a Trump supporter. And here's the icing on the cake. ABC News is getting called out for setting up Donald Trump in their debate. War broke out in the Ukraine in 2022 when Russia invaded the nation. Another war broke out in the Middle East late October when Hamas terrorists launched attacks on Israel. Trump argued that if he were in the Oval Office over the last 3.5 years, wars would not have sparked out in Israel or Ukraine. He said that October 7th, when Israel-Hamas war started, it would have never happened if he were the president. This was just one of the policy questions Trump fielded with Fox News' Sean Hannity in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, just days ahead of his first debate against Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's not forget, though, Trump won the state in 2016 when he earned 44,292 more votes than the Democratic nominee, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The state then elected President Joe Biden in his matchup against Trump in 2020 at a 1.17% margin. Needless to say, guys, both parties want to win the Keystone State. Both Harris and Donald Trump repeatedly visited Pennsylvania in recent weeks. Harris was most recently joined joined by Biden in the president's first campaign event for the Harris Waltz ticket since he bowed out of the race in July. And in just a few short days, Trump and Harris will take the stage in Pennsylvania for their first and perhaps only debate, which is going to be held in Philadelphia. I think it's really odd that the Donald Trump assassination attempt was taking place in Pennsylvania, the very state that is so key to both presidential hopefuls. Again, I don't believe in coincidences. Me personally, I think they wanted to, number one, take Donald Trump out of the race altogether, but at a minimum, the attempt should have scared him away from the state, and it didn't work. Another issue Donald Trump brought up in his Pennsylvania town hall pre-debate was the spiraling illegal immigration that has plagued the United States since 2021. Former President Trump said that they want open borders. She wants open borders. He didn't miss calling out Harris for her flip-flop on the border. He said that the vice president is all of a sudden, oh, I think we're closing the borders. She was the border czar, whether you like it or not. But even if you don't want to use that term, she was in charge of the border. As a result, Donald Trump said it's the worst border in the history of the world, not just here. There's never been a country that allowed 21 million people to come in over a 3-year period. There's never been. He also mentioned that out of the 21 million people, many are from prisons, many of whom are murderers and drug dealers and child traffickers. I would say that this is pretty relevant considering immigration is the second most important issue to voters behind the economy heading into the 2024 election, according to recent Fox News polling. Now, as for our economy, Trump predicted that the United States will fall into an economic depression if Harris wins the general election on November 5th. He said it'll be like 1929. This will be a 1929 depression. According to Trump, Harris has no idea what the hell she's doing. He compared that to how he gave Americans the biggest tax cuts in the history of our country. These Trump tax cuts are also about to expire, and Kamala Harris wants to terminate them. According to the former president, if you do that, you will suffer the biggest tax increase in history. There's never been a tax increase like it, on top of which she wants to add a lot of tax. Trump cited Harris's proposal on capital tax gains and her plan to install price controls on companies to combat price gouging as evidence that the United States would just hit more financial woes similar to the Great Depression if Harris is elected to the Oval Office. She even wants to tax unrealized gains. In fact, guys, that ABC lopsided debate, I've heard a lot of people say that they just no longer support Kamala Harris. Instead, they're actually voting for Donald Trump. Media Buzz host Howard Kurtz called out the network bias and gave the ABC moderators a D grade. And that was being generous.
Howie, how do you grade ABC on this debate?
Sandra, ABC gets a D minus, and that's being generous. In fact, the network's moderators were so blatantly biased against Donald Trump that it vindicated his pregame criticism of ABC as dishonest. Now, putting aside Kamala Harris's aggressive performance, moderators David Muir and Linsey Davis asked much tougher questions of the former president, repeatedly followed up and corrected his responses on, as you said, 5 occasions. For the vice president, the figure was zilch. For example, while Harris was asked about abandoning her previous left-wing positions on fracking, she originally said she opposed, and abolishing private health insurance, she danced around those questions or said things that were untrue with no fact-checking at all by ABC. The same goes for the VP's out-of-context charge that Trump had warned of a bloodbath if he loses. Now, when Harris said things that were false, such as that Trump is actively pursuing the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which he has repeatedly disavowed, there was no challenge by ABC.
Understand what has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments.
Actually, Trump has been a leading advocate of IVF treatments, but the former president was constantly pressed on whether he rejects anything he did on January 6th or whether he wants Ukraine to win the war against Russia. When Trump said crime was rising, ABC's Muir said, President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. Now, there were times when fact-checking was appropriate, such as when Trump repeated a debunked claim that Haitian immigrants in Ohio were eating pets. But it was generally one-sided, so one-sided as to support Trump's complaint the debate was 3 against 1.
Now, honestly, guys, I just can't fathom right now the idea of Harris becoming president. If this debate were any indication, I mean, you just got to wonder what would happen if Vice President Kamala Harris gets another 4 years in the White House. Honestly, it just kind of makes me worried about the country, you know? Now, one thing that you heard Kurtz talking about Project 2025 and Kamala Harris basically lying that Donald Trump had something to do with it. Well, here's former director of Project 2025, Paul Dans, saying categorically that our former President Donald Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025.
You know, the breaking news is Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025. Sure, a lot of us have worked in the admin and came together, but this started long before he even announced for president.
Now, I'm telling you guys, though their party may think otherwise, the debate went awfully for the vice president. Just check out how independent voters, the people who Harris are trying to get on her side, actually sided with Donald Trump as he spoke during the debate.
She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one.
My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
I want to get reaction from former Home Depot CEO Bob Nardelli. Bob, great to see you again. Thanks for being here. Yeah, the thing that I really like about this plan is you're not being penalized if you have to buy stuff abroad. I mean, a lot of companies obviously couldn't do that. You'd still be taxed at the 21% corporate tax rate, which is a lot lower than what Kamala Harris is proposing. She'd go up 33% to 28%. But you are free to choose if you want that bonus of paying 15% if you buy American. It's to use that phrase of Milton Friedman's, you're free to choose. You're not going to be penalized, but you would be incentivized to buy American. Do you like the plan?
Now, before we hear from the Home Depot CEO on this one, I think that this plan from Donald Trump is absolutely brilliant. I think it's remarkable. Kamala Harris, I mean, as many people call her now, Comrade Kamala Harris, Commie Kamala Harris. Basically, Donald Trump has opened the free market. He believes in capitalism. He believes that companies, corporations should be able to choose where they source their materials from, where they source their labor from. Donald Trump is now calling for a 15% corporate tax rate for companies that make products in the United States. So this would actually be technically what Kamala Harris says, one of the big tax cuts for corporations. But here's what they're not telling us. This is what they're not telling people, right? And this is why it ends up being another double standard, another two-faced lie, another half-truth that ABC News was unwilling to fact check her on. What this actually does is it incentivizes corporations to source products here in the United States. It's basically like getting a discount. Trump is calling for a 15% tax rate for companies that make products in the United States. This is one of Donald Trump's plans, or concepts of plans, as he said in the ABC debate, which would actually make companies spend more money here in the United States, drive up employment opportunities for working class families in the middle class and whatnot, and to make America great again. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear from the CEO of Home Depot.
Yeah, well, David, you've had a great show so far. No lack of issues for sure.
Thanks.
But I think the plan that he proposed has a lot of merit to it. It really is encouraging localization, if I could use that. You know, the other party is proposing heavier taxes, corporate taxes, and I've lived through this before, David. I've lived through 7 recessions, and when you increase those corporate taxes, you basically force an offshoring strategy. Because you have to compete on a global scale. So I think he's very creative with this plan. And again, there's a lot of questions about tariffs out there. And President Trump really used tariffs quite effectively, I think, not as a...
And I just want to really highlight some of these big Donald Trump economic plan points here. Look, make 2017 tax cuts permanent, end taxes on Social Security benefits, guys. This is massive. How many people have you heard of who receive Social Security or SSI or SSDI, or they're approaching retirement? They're maxing out their 401ks. They're maxing out their IRA investment accounts, trying to get ready to retire, trying to, achieve financial freedom and financial independence. And they're worried about getting a scary letter from the Social Security Administration, the SSA. There's thousands, there's hundreds of thousands of fixed income retirees right now getting letters from the SSA threatening to garnish and take back overpayments that the Social Security Administration has accidentally sent out. Here you have Donald Trump trying to end taxes on Social Security benefits. I can't make this stuff up. 10% tariffs on all imports, boosting fossil fuel production. Look, this is clearly going to lower gas prices. Not that Kamala Harris even cares about gas prices. She don't even drive. Reduces corporate tax rate. They make it seem like this is a bad thing. But here we have the former CEO of Home Depot explaining how Donald Trump's creative tax plan actually helps more than just the corporations. This is going to help the middle class. And let's not forget about the no tax on tips here. This is brilliant. But what's Kamala Harris's plan? She didn't even answer any of ABC News moderators' questions during the debate.
Policy, but as a practice. He did get China's attention and got him to the table, and they had a fair negotiation about making sure the quid pro quo of trade in, trade out, and affecting GDP. So this is yet another creative idea, as many of what he's proposing in his campaign, and certainly challenges the other party as to the legitimacy and the common sense of some of the things that they're proposing, given where we are, and particularly some of the numbers we saw today, David.
Now, Kamala Harris's campaign has attacked the president's plan, the former president's plan on tariffs, saying that they would be an inflation creation, and there's some merit to that idea. You look at Milton Friedman's works on tariffs, and they pretty much confirm a lot of that. However, he used it, as you said, in a reciprocal fashion. He wasn't willy-nilly throwing tariffs on everything. If China came out with a 75% tariff against our cars, he would do the same, and that got them to close it down a little bit. And inflation, as far as inflation is concerned, inflation stayed about the same during his entire administration.
Yeah, I think, tariffs that create trade wars, just like price wars, and I've lived through all of those, are not a good thing. But if you use it in practice, not policy, like he did, is exactly what you said. He got us to the table. Now, the tariff on EVs, quite honestly, sounds great, but the U.S. consumer, put their own tariffs on EVs coming out of China. They just don't want them. They're not buying them. So I'm not sure the real impact on increased prices and so forth are going to have a basis there. If you look at VW, for example, they were displaced in China by BYD. And you look at Volvo, they're pulling back. You look at what happened here in the U.S. Ford and Jim Farley had to write about $6 billion off. Mary Bauer let off about 1,000 employees, Stellantis 2,500. So the EVs will happen, but it has to be an evolution, i.e. hybrid, versus a revolution, pure EV. And when the other administration talks about we're going to be all EV on the road, David, there's 290 million fossil fuel cars on the road today. Somebody asked the second question like you do. What happens to when you talk about all EVs, how do you get rid of 290 million cars? The average age is now 12.6 years.
Now, guys, I did a previous video that you definitely need to watch after this one because they do not want you to know the truth. But I spill the tea for you guys. They want to keep you guys in the dark about these kinds of things, but we cannot allow this to happen. Anyway, Appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and for sharing these videos on social media. I'll catch you guys on the next one.